It began with a call that chills a father's soul. A trembling voice spoke just 8 shattering words. "Dad, my back hurts. I can't hold Jonah anymore." In that instant, Jack Carter, a warrior who had stared down the chaos of war zones, felt a chill that ran deeper than fear. Instinct took command. He abandoned his mission, climbing into his truck with his loyal dog Rex, and raced toward the home where his 2 children waited. But what was waiting behind that door was far worse than just pain or exhaustion. It was a truth more harrowing than any battlefield. A story forged not in war, but in love, neglect, and the devastating price of silence. Before we dive in, please remember to like and subscribe. And I have to ask, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the globe. The late afternoon sun was sinking over the quiet borders of Willow Creek, spilling amber light on dry fields and suburban homes, making them glow like embers against the coming night. Jack Carter stood by his weathered truck, the air heavy with dust and the faint scent of pine drifting on a western wind. He was 42, his face etched not just by years of service, but by the weight of memories a man should never have to carry. His olive green jacket, a constant companion, smelled of gun oil and old rain. At his side, ever vigilant, was Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd, his sable coat marked by a black saddle, his chest and legs a warm tan, his amber eyes both sharp and steadfast. Together, they were part of a community, outreach old soldiers lending their skills to train local search and rescue teams. But on this day, the world felt unnervingly still, holding its breath for a change that was yet unseen. The sudden ring of a phone tore through the silence. Jack pulled it from his pocket, his hand reflexively steady, a calm forged in the heart of combat. But the instant he heard his daughter's fragile voice, all of that composure disappeared. Dad, my back hurts. I can't hold Jonah anymore." Her small, strained words were cut short by the sudden clatter of something falling. The muffled cry of a baby, then a sudden, awful silence. Just the cold hiss of the line going dead. For a moment, Jack stood frozen under the dying light, his world shrinking to one single dreadful thought. Something was profoundly wrong. He didn't have to think. His instincts, the very ones that kept men alive on faraway battlefields, roared back to life. He vaulted into the driver's seat, Rex leaping in beside him with a low whine as the truck engine groaned to life. The tires bit into the gravel, tearing down the road and kicking up a frantic cloud of dust behind them. Jack's heart pounded out a cold, precise beat, a frantic drum for every mile that stood between him and home. He dialed Marilyn, his second wife, his voice sharp with urgency. Nothing. He called again. Still silence. On the 3rd try, the screen just flashed, "Unreachable." A cold dread coiled deep in his stomach. He pressed harder on the gas, the speedometer climbing as the world became a blur of dying light and oncoming night. As the truck crested the final hill over Willow Creek, the town's first lights flickered to life, small squares of hope that were meant to signal safety. But now they seemed so distant and cold. The house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, its porch light a single glowing eye in the dark. Jack killed the engine and listened. An unnatural hush had fallen. Rex's ears swiveled, a deep growl rumbling in his chest. It was the only signal Jack required. He shoved the car door open and sprinted. The home's front door was ajar, swaying gently on its hinges, a slender beam of light bleeding from the darkness inside. The stench hit him first, sour milk, harsh detergent, and a coppery tang underneath. The floor was treacherous, strewn with shattered glass and the wreckage of overturned plates. His boots marked the floor with wet tracks as he moved down the hall. "Emily." Her name was a fractured, desperate whisper. "Sweetheart." From the kitchen, a faint sound emerged, not a word, but the fragile whimper of a child, the very sound that awakened something primal in a father's soul. Jack pushed toward it, each step a dead weight, his own breath roaring in his ears. Rex followed tail down his nose, scanning the floor on alert. Emily was there kneeling on the cold kitchen tiles, her tiny hands clutching a towel, pulling it across the floor that glistened under the stark ceiling light. She was only 7, impossibly small for her age, her fine blonde hair plastered to her damp brow, the pale exhaustion draining the life from her face. Across her slender back, shadows of bruises stained her skin beneath her collar, marking burdens a child should never have to bear. On her shoulder clung Jonah, the 6-month-old baby, his cheeks red and streaked with tears, his tiny fists desperately gripping her neck, as if he feared plummeting into the vast emptiness below. For a moment, the air vanished from Jack's lungs. As Emily looked up, her eyes grew wide, and every ounce of tension suddenly shattered within her little frame. "Dad." The word was a breath, not a sound. Jack's knees hit the floor beside her, the frigid water instantly seeping into his jeans as he pulled her into his arms. Jonah whimpered, his tiny weight a fragile pressure against Jack's heart. "Where's Marilyn?" he asked, his voice shaking, though he fought to keep it steady. Emily hesitated, her bottom lip trembling. She left this morning." Her voice was small. "I had to finish all the chores before she came home. She said if I didn't, we couldn't eat dinner." Jack's jaw clenched, his breathing deliberate and slow, even as the blood hammered in his ears. His eyes scanned the room, the sink overflowing with dishes, the floor still half soaked, the bottle on the counter half drained. Rex paced restlessly, sensing the storm brewing beneath his master's stillness. Emily's little shoulders trembled as she tried to resume cleaning the floor. "I just didn't want the house to be messy," she whispered, "so Mommy wouldn't get mad." The word Mommy hung in the air, a foreign, misplaced ghost. Not the sound of love, but of a fear she learned too young. Jack lifted her with an ease that recalled the days she was small, falling asleep on the couch, while waiting for him to return from deployment. But now she didn't rest her head on his shoulder. She remained rigid, her arms a protective cage around Jonah. She felt so light, terrifyingly so. He could feel a faint trembling in her muscles, her skin radiating heat from pure exhaustion. "It's okay now," he murmured. "You don't have to do another thing." He carried her to the couch and gently laid both children down and brushed the damp hair from Emily's face. Her eyes fluttered closed, torn between relief and profound exhaustion. He dialed emergency services with one hand, his other resting on Jonah's small back, feeling the baby's breathing begin to steady. The operator's voice became a blur of questions and assurances, a distant promise of help drowned out by the chaos in his head. Jack's eyes swept the room once more, his gaze landing on the overturned chair, the discarded cleaner, a woman's faint shoe print near the door, each detail forming a devastating picture he couldn't unsee. A portrait of abandonment painted in silence and routine. Rex sat by the door, his gaze locked on his master's expression, his amber eyes unwavering, awaiting a command that would not come. Not on this night. Flashing red and blue lights washed over the front yard as medics arrived. Jack followed them outside, Jonah held securely in his arms. Emily was wrapped in a blanket, the cool night air carrying the faint scent of rain and gasoline. He stood by as they checked his daughter under the stark glare, their professional calm fractured by a single telling glance between them. It was a look that confirmed his fear she was carrying far more than her little brother. She had been carrying their entire world. As they eased her onto the stretcher, she stirred her eyelids, fluttering open just enough to meet his gaze. "Oh, Dad, I'm sorry," she breathed. Leaning in close, Jack's voice was a raw whisper. "You have nothing to be sorry for." At the hospital, the sterile brightness and the chemical scent of antiseptic weighed on him as he stood beside Emily's bed. Her small hand was bound in gauze, a brace supporting the overworked muscles of her back. The attending doctor, a kind-eyed woman, explained in a measured tone that these injuries were not the result of a single fall, but from cumulative strain, a deep exhaustion built up over countless days. "She needs rest," the doctor said, "and she needs someone by her side. A child should never have to do what she has." Jack could only nod silently, his gaze locked on the steady rhythm of Emily's breathing. Jonah slept peacefully in a nearby crib, unaware of the tempest they had just weathered. When the room finally fell silent, Jack took a seat by the window, staring out into the endless darkness beyond the pane. The city lights glimmered on the horizon, but he was blind to them. His mind was elsewhere. He was replaying the final moments of the call, her breaking voice, the sickening thud, the cry. Then Marilyn's crushing silence. The phone that never answered, the memory of her first smile, how he'd mistaken her control for strength, her calculated charm for care. He pressed his temples, feeling a guilt that cut deeper than any wound he had ever sustained on the battlefield. Rex was curled up into the doorway of the hospital room, head on his paws, his eyes half closed but ever watchful. Jack looked at his dog, at that unwavering loyalty, and felt the first glimmer of solid ground beneath him. He sank back into the chair, his hand instinctively finding the cool metal of his dog tag under his jacket, a familiar grounding gesture he never abandoned, a reminder of promises made long ago. The war he was fighting tonight was no longer out there in the desert or the ruins of some other land. It was right here, within these softly painted white walls, where the quiet inflicted more pain than the noise. And as the monitors beside his daughter hummed their quiet rhythm, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was one fight he would not leave unfinished. By the next morning, the night had finally surrendered to a pale gray dawn as Jack drove back toward Willow Creek. The last stars were fading from the horizon, dissolving into the cold, unforgiving light of the new day. A profound silence pressed in from beyond the windshield, a heavy calm blanketing the town, as if it held its breath just for him. Emily and Jonah were safe, resting under the sterile watch of the hospital, leaving Jack to face an empty home for the first time in an eternity. No longer just a soldier, but a father, shattered by the events of a single night. In the back, Rex remained a silent, watchful presence, his amber eyes scanning the darkness, tracking every shadow as they moved through the silent streets toward home. A crisp bite in the air met Jack as he stepped from the truck. The dew-kissed lawn shimmered faintly. His house stood sentinel at the street's end, the first rays of dawn painting its white walls, creating a fragile illusion of tranquility. But peace, he knew, was a mirage, something only seen from a distance. Inside the air was a ghost story lemon cleaner, clashing with the lingering sweetness of Marilyn's perfume, a hollow echo of her meticulously staged and unnervingly sterile. Shards of broken dishes from the night's chaos still littered the table. Jack stood frozen in the doorway for a long, heavy moment, gazing upon the ruins of his sanctuary, realizing the deepest fear wasn't about what he might uncover, but the crushing weight of what he already knew. He moved into the living room, the floorboards groaning softly beneath his heavy boots. A stack of unopened mail lay on the corner desk, the envelopes aged and yellowed, arranged with a chilling precision, as if awaiting a recipient who was never coming back. He sat tearing open the first. The county's official seal stared back, a stark warning in red ink. Notice of mortgage transfer. He blinked his mind, refusing to process the words. At the bottom, a signature that was his name, but not his hand. The penmanship was too fluid, too deliberate. He ripped open another. A final notice payment past due. His pulse evened out, a soldier's discipline overriding the storm in his chest. His hands remained steady as his heart hammered. He opened a third, a dire warning of impending foreclosure. The pieces clicked into place with a terrifying, deliberate clarity. Jack slowly rose to his feet, surveying the house that was meant to be his fortress, built on the promise that his hard work would keep it standing proud and safe forever. Now he felt like a ghost in a tomb, a structure already surrendering to an insidious decay. Rex padded toward him. Ears pricked his tail, sweeping the floor in a steady, reassuring rhythm, a silent command to stay grounded. Jack let out a slow breath, crossing to the small corner desk where an old desktop computer hummed quietly in its sleep. He wiped a film of dust from the screen, woke the machine, and logged into the joint account he'd neglected for weeks. The figures materialized slowly, glowing eerily in the pale morning light. The balance was impossibly devastatingly low. A list of recent transactions scrolled up the screen, a pattern too methodical to be mere recklessness. Beauty spas in Seattle, luxury hotels in Portland, exclusive bars, jewelry boutiques, car rentals. Thousands of dollars had vanished in mere weeks. His eyes locked on a line-item private transport service. Then an exclusive retreat. Another charge, a Bellevue Spa premium package. The words blurred, then sharpened with sickening clarity as the truth settled in his gut. This wasn't just recklessness. He was reading a deliberate choice. A choice to abandon, to indulge, to erase their entire life in an act of quiet, devastating betrayal. He lifted his phone and dialed the bank. A polite, detached voice answered a man with a practiced and indifferent calm, a tone that made each word land with the weight of a hammer. "Yes, sir. The withdrawals were all authorized by Mrs. Carter. The signatures and access were a perfect match. No fraud was detected." Jack's jaw clenched. The man on the phone continued to explain, but his words were just static, impersonal, and cold. "Everything is in order." That phrase echoed in his mind long after he hung up. Everything was in order, except the very family that order was meant to protect. Rex's low, knowing bark broke the stillness. The dog stood by the old oak cabinet, a single paw tapping insistently at the bottom drawer. Jack knelt beside his faithful friend and pulled it open. Inside lay folded bills and old manuals, and beneath them a hidden envelope heavy with documents. He slid it out, unfolding the contents. A debt collection notice. Then another. A final warning. The total amount due was circled in red, a number that made his stomach twist into a knot. He stared down at the dates. They were weeks old. Marilyn had seen them, hidden them, and simply went on with her life. Jack sank to the floor, the papers crushing in his grip. For a moment, the house fell so silent that the ticking hallway clock sounded like a final countdown. When he finally rose, his eyes fell upon the small security monitor mounted near the TV. He hadn't glanced at it since its installation months ago. It was a precaution meant for safety, not for this kind of suspicion. The screen flickered to life as the footage began to play. He fast-forwarded, blurring through the days, watching time pass in a haze of shadow and light. And then he saw her. Emily, moving through the kitchen, her tiny shoulders squared beneath the weight of Jonah in her arms. Emily standing on her tiptoes just to reach the counter. Emily, wiping the floor hair falling across her face. Hour after hour passed, and Marilyn was never there. Not even once. Jack sat perfectly still, his face a faint reflection in the dark screen when he finally paused the recording. The truth was a bloodless wound, a quiet cut that hurt deeper because it made no sound. He watched on for a few more seconds and saw Emily look up at a sudden noise, her face tired but alert, like a soldier trained to listen for any sign of danger. Then the front door opened briefly. Marilyn entered, heels clicking sharply, tossing her purse onto the couch, saying nothing to anyone. Within minutes, she was gone. The silence that followed was somehow heavier than before. He rose and moved through his home like a man walking a battlefield. Upstairs, the bedroom smelled faintly of perfume, the kind that hangs in the air too long. Her vanity was cluttered with makeup boutique receipts and an empty jewelry box. A photo sat on the dresser. Emily at 5, a missing front tooth, in her smile, beside Marilyn's carefully posed figure. Jack turned it face down. On the nightstand, a leather notebook lay open, the initials MS stamped in gold. Inside were appointments, spa schedules, and transfers. One note had been underlined twice. Bellevue Retreat, confirmed deposit. He stared at it until the words began to lose all their shape, until they became just symbols of something that could never be fixed. Morning light had filled the house by the time Jack came downstairs, but it brought him no warmth. The home, stripped of its illusions, now felt smaller, beautiful on the outside, but hollowed out within. He stood in the doorway to the living room, Rex at his side, both staring into the quiet space that had once rung with so much laughter. The line between duty and love, he finally understood, had blurred away to nothing long before this day. He drew his phone from his pocket, his thumb swiping open the final communication from his commanding officer. For a fleeting moment, his thumbs hung in the air before deliberately typing 2 words. Taking leave. He pressed send, the decision now forged in steel. He walked into the kitchen, his steps halting before the refrigerator. A drawing was still taped there, Emily's work. The crayon colors now faded at the edges. A radiant yellow sun, a small house, and 3 stick figures holding hands. With a tender touch, he traced the lines of one of the figures. This is what matters. He whispered the words, spoken only to the silence of the house. Rex lifted his head, his tail giving a single knowing flick. Jack straightened his shoulders, sweeping his gaze one last time across the hollowed-out home, and a strange calm settled deep in his chest. Whatever battles lay ahead, they would be fought right here within the sanctuary of these walls. The mission, he scoffed at the word, was no longer about service or mere survival. It was now about protection, about reclaiming a life that had been nearly swallowed by silence. As dusk settled over Willow Creek, the sky had shifted to the color of tarnished brass, and the air outside hummed with the low thrum of cicadas hidden in the trees. Jack stood sentinel by the window of the hospital room, watching the faint rhythm of headlights weaving through the streets below. Emily was propped up on the bed, a soft brace circling her small back. Her small hand clutched a cup of warm milk, while beside her Jonah slept peacefully in a portable crib. His tiny chest rose and fell with the gentle rhythm of an untroubled dream. Just then the doctor returned, offering a calm smile, confirming that both of his children were strong enough to finally go home tonight. Jack just nodded his silence, speaking volumes. His relief was visible only in the long, slow exhale he hadn't realized he was holding. Then Emily looked up at him, her lips curving into a faint smile. Something deep inside him finally let go a silent vow fulfilled between father and daughter. The drive home was a long one, though the actual distance was short. The world beyond the windows had deepened to a dark indigo. The moon sliced through the clouds as though afraid to look too closely at the house they neared. Emily sat in the back, her eyes heavy but refusing to close. Rex curled beside her, his head resting as a loyal guardian near her knees. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror, catching her tired reflection. Pale, exhausted, but safe. That was the only thing that mattered. When they finally got home, he carried Jonah into the house, the small bundle sleeping soundly against his chest. A profound silence filled the house with the faint scent of stale perfume still hanging in the air. But he refused to let it haunt him. He gently settled the baby in his crib, and then tucked Emily into her bed, and he watched as Rex lay down at her feet, his eyes half closed but still alert, the silent guardian of their family's fragile peace. For the first time in weeks, it felt as if the house might just belong to them once more. Jack moved through the rooms with quiet purpose, shutting windows, extinguishing the hum of unneeded lights. In the soft glow of the lamp by the couch, he finally sat resting for a moment with his elbows on his knees, his head bowed. The faint ticking of the wall clock echoed in the silence. He looked around, taking in the small shoes by the door, the folded blanket on the armchair, the half-finished glass of milk Emily left on the counter. These mundane details held a fragile, tremulous kind of hope, the kind that trembled beneath the weight of exhaustion but steadfastly refused to break. He finally leaned back, whispering almost to himself, "We're finally home." But that fragile peace was destined to shatter. By the next afternoon, as the golden light bled into twilight, a sound tore through the quiet tires, screaming on pavement, then the sharp, angry slam of a car door. Rex sensed it first, his head snapping up, a deep growl vibrating in his chest. Jack rose slowly, his heart clenching. A moment later, the front door flew open, and Marilyn staggered across the threshold, her perfume a cloying cloud that instantly filled the hall. At 38, her beauty was a well-rehearsed performance, her once sharp composure now a frayed memory replaced by the careless glamour of too many late nights. Her eyes were vacant, haloed in smeared mascara, and her heels clicked unevenly across the hardwood floor. "Well," she slurred, her voice laced with defiance. "Look who's home. The hero returns." Jack remained motionless, his hands clenched at his sides, his voice a quiet force. "Where were you?" The question was simple, yet heavy with restraint. Marilyn let out a laugh, a sharp, hollow sound that cracked the silence of the house. "Where have you been? Jack, playing soldier boy while I was left to hold it all together." She kicked off her heels, stumbling toward the kitchen, and reached for the wine bottle on the counter. Rex pressed against Jack's leg, the growl in his chest a constant warning. The very air grew thick with tension, each breath a struggle under the weight of unspoken history. Jack followed her into the kitchen's harsh light, his voice dangerously level. "I saw the bank statements, Marilyn. The house, the charges, spas, hotels. You took out a second mortgage on our home. You buried us in debt." Her hand froze the wine glass, trembling just before she set it on the counter. For one fleeting moment, her facade shattered a flash of shock, then fear before defiance flooded back, twice as venomous. "You weren't here!" She spat the words like poison. "You were never here. Did you think sending money home made you a father?" Her accusation hung between them, a toxic haze poisoning the room. Jack's response was a low, devastating whisper. "You left our children alone." That simple truth shattered the last of her composure. She slammed the glass down, sending splinters of crystal skittering across the granite. "Don't you dare judge me," she seethed. "You chose the missions. You chose them over us. You're always saving the world while I was left to drown here." Her words ran together in a drunken slur, but their venom was unmistakable. Jack never raised his voice. He didn't need to. "I chose to serve," he stated calmly. "You chose to disappear." A heavy silence descended, stretching thin and tight, the tension coiling between them so thick it felt as if the very walls might crack. And then a tiny sound from down the hall, the soft creak of a door, the whisper of small feet on the floorboards. Emily stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with a child's fear. She clutched baby Jonah tightly to her small chest. The infant whimpered his faint cry, a fragile sound beneath the refrigerator's hum. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, don't make us stay with her anymore." Her words hit Jack harder than any physical blow. Marilyn spun around, startled, but the raw terror in Emily's eyes froze her in place. It wasn't defiance or anger. It was a profound, quiet fear. Every muscle in Jack's body went taut. The line had just been crossed. In that single heartbeat, everything changed. He moved to Emily, kneeling to gently take the baby from her trembling arms. "Go to your room, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice a fortress of calm. "You and Jonah are going to be okay." She hesitated for a second, then gave a small nod, retreating back down the hall, Rex shadowing her every step, a silent, steadfast guardian. Jack rose to his full height, turning to finally face Marilyn. The gulf between them felt immense. "This is over tonight," he stated. "You can pack your things, or I will have someone else do it for you. But you are leaving." Marilyn's face contorted a mask of rage and disbelief. "Oh, you can't just do this," she seethed. "This is my home too." Jack's expression remained unbroken. "Not anymore." His voice was a low whisper, almost inaudible, yet it held the crushing weight of finality. For a second, she looked as if she would fight back once more, but her eyes shot toward the hallway, where the fragile sound of Emily's weeping still lingered in the air. Whatever she faced in that sound, the fear, the truth, the consequence shattered her defiance. She snatched her purse from the kitchen counter, whispering venomous curses as she shoved past him toward the front door. The lock clicked shut with cold finality, leaving a deafening silence in her wake. Jack stood motionless for what felt like an age. The refrigerators hummed the crickets' distant song outside, were the only sounds remaining. The scent of spilled wine and broken glass saturated the air, sharp and bitter. He breathed out slowly, steadying his soul. He cut the lights, checking on Emily and Jonah. Both were sound asleep, with Rex curled as a guardian by the crib. He sat at the kitchen table. The laptop was open, its screen a pale glow in the darkness. He typed each word with precision, as though it were a report he had filed 100 times before. Emergency Custody Protection Order. Then he signed his name. As he finally closed the computer, the night was utterly still. He leaned back, an ache in his chest spreading like a slow fire. Outside, a soft breeze whispered through the leaves, carrying on it the faint echo of something new. It was not peace, not yet, but the very beginning of it. Jack kneaded the back of his neck, the raw edge of fatigue yielding to something far steadier, something resolute. Upstairs in the darkness, Emily stirred in her sleep, her small hand reaching through the dark until it found the steady warmth of Rex's coat. The house, for the first time in ages, was quiet. Not the silence of fear, but of survival. Dawn broke gently over Willow Creek, spilling its pale light across the rooftops and the silent curve of the street. The air held the scent of cut grass and the distant hum of a train moving through the valley. Inside the small suburban home, the sunlight touched the walls with warm, forgiving light, and Jack stood in his kitchen sleeves, rolled up, staring at a baby bottle and a pot of water, as if they were gear for a mission he had no memory of training for. Rex lay close by his tail, flicking slowly against the tile, watching his person with a quiet patience only a veteran German shepherd could have. Jack sighed, measured the formula again, and still poured it wrong. Half of it spilled across the counter. He let out a quiet laugh, the sound almost foreign, but it was genuine. He muttered, "We'll get this, buddy." Emily's small footsteps approached, light yet sure. Her hair fell in loose strands around a pale face still soft from her sleep. Her eyes held a mixture of deep caution and profound kindness. The look children get when life demands they grow up far too soon. She quietly climbed onto a chair, reaching for the counter, moving with the quiet competence of someone who had done this 100 times. "You're supposed to shake it first." "Dad," she whispered without looking up. Jack watched her steady, practiced hands and felt something inside his chest just break. "That's my turn now," he offered softly, his hand closing over hers on the bottle. She held on for a beat, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod, she released her grip and stepped away, clasping her hands neatly behind her back. The morning that followed was a clumsy ballet of trial and error. Jack scorched the toast, forgot to burp Jonah after his bottle, and sent a dish clattering to the floor. He nearly went sprawling over Rex, who had stationed himself like a steadfast, furry shadow right beside the crib. But through it all, laughter began to surface. It was the kind that seeps back into a home like sunlight, pushing through the fine cracks of long-drawn curtains. Emily's giggle rang out when he tried to fold a baby blanket and wound up in a tangle himself. Rex let out a single sharp bark, his tail thumping his approval. Standing in the heart of the kitchen, a warm bottle in one hand and a dish towel in the other, Jack felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, the silence in his house felt like a comforting embrace, not a heavy shroud. As the days bled into weeks, a new rhythm took hold. Jack found himself rising with the dawn, not from a sense of duty, but because Jonah's cries felt like a summons he was eager to answer. He mastered the art of measuring formula without spilling, and learned the perfect sway to rock the baby until his tiny fist uncurled in deep sleep. He even found himself humming the simple tune he'd once heard Emily sing to soothe her little brother, a melody of hope. The first morning he successfully made breakfast without a single burnt offering. Emily clapped softly from the table, her eyes bright with pride. "See," she whispered, "I knew you could do it." Jack managed a small smile. "Well, I had a good teacher." She glanced away, a shy blush on her cheeks, but he could still see the grin she tried to hide. Rex, meanwhile, had assumed his own silent duties. Self-appointed and unwavering, he shadowed Jack's every move. He would lie guard beside Jonah's crib as the baby slept, and took up his post by the front door each and every evening, a vigilant guardian. His head rested on his paws, a silent sentinel watching over his family. Whenever Emily played quietly in the living room, Rex's devoted gaze never left her the slightest sound from outside, prompting a twitch of his ears. Once, when a delivery driver knocked without warning, Rex instantly placed himself between Emily and the door, holding his ground, with a low rumble in his chest, until Jack appeared calm but ready. In that quiet little house, the dog was so much more than a pet. He was a constant, a loyal guardian, a living testament that safety was something they could feel again. One peaceful afternoon, sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting golden bars of light across the wooden floor. Jack was at the kitchen counter, scrubbing with his sleeves rolled up and damp, when Emily walked in carrying a basket of laundry. "I can get that," she offered. "I used to do it." He stopped her, not with a harsh word, but with a look that was simply certain. "You used to because you had to, he said gently. "Now you don't." She paused, her gaze shifting to the sink as if debating whether to press the issue. Finally, she gave a small nod, set the heavy basket down, and took a seat at the table, her fingers tracing the hem of her shirt. Jack went back to cleaning, not to rush the silence, but to let it settle and breathe comfortably between them, a shared peace. It was a healing quiet, the kind that slowly stitches a family back together. That night, long after Jonah had drifted to sleep, Jack moved through the house with a large cardboard box. He began in the bedroom with Marilyn's collection of perfumes, the high heels left standing by the door, the framed photograph with her carefully crafted smile. Every object he placed inside felt like a stone being lifted from his soul. There was no anger, no lingering sorrow. He was simply and quietly clearing away the things that no longer had a place in this new life. Emily watched from the shadows of the hallway, clutching a sketchbook to her chest. "Are you mad at her?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack's gaze rested on the box for a long moment before answering. "No," he said. "I'm just making room." By the week's end, the house had transformed in small but profound ways. The harsh scent of perfume was gone, replaced by the warm smell of coffee and baby powder. Crayons were now scattered like confetti across the dining room table, and once closed blinds now let morning light flood in. Jack painted the living room a softer color, then mended the old porch railing, and built a little play corner by the window for Emily. When it was all done, he stood back, hands planted on his hips, watching his daughter sketch by the window. Her small shoulders were relaxed, her laughter now unguarded. He realized then that true rebuilding didn't start with hammers or paint. It started when a child finally felt safe enough to laugh again. Emily began filling the walls with her drawings. Simple at first, then growing brighter, fuller. One showed Rex wearing a superhero cape. Another had Jonah in his crib, surrounded by stars. But then one morning, Jack saw a new drawing on the fridge. A family of 3 was holding hands under a wide blue sky, with "Our Home" written in uneven letters just below. He stood before it for the longest time, feeling a quiet warmth swell inside him. When Emily noticed him looking, she said quickly, "I can add more if you want." He just shook his head and smiled. "It's perfect." Sometimes late at night when the house was still, Jack would sit out on the porch with Rex right beside him, the cool air brushing his face. The street was calm, the world quiet. Through the window he could see Emily fast asleep, Jonah breathing softly in his crib. He reflected on how strange it was that healing doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in gentle and persistent through laughter and spilled milk, and through drawings taped on a refrigerator door. He looked down at Rex and murmured, "We're finally getting it right, aren't we, boy?" The dog's tail thumped once against his boot. A silent, certain yes. The sky over Willow Creek shimmered in the calm brightness of early spring. Soft clouds drifted like half-formed thoughts over rooftops that had been washed clean by the rain. The air held the tender stillness that comes only after a long season of storms. Inside the house, sunlight spread across wooden floors, touching the small details, defining their lives now. Emily's watercolor brushes were drying by the sink. Jonah's toys were scattered under the window. Rex slept near the back door, his heavy muzzle resting on his paws. Jack stood at the kitchen counter, coffee cooling in his hands, watching the quiet rhythm of his new morning unfold before him. It had taken months of slow, hard work to find this peace, not the absence of pain, but the strength to live with it. When a letter came from his unit offering another assignment, Jack read it 2 times over. Then he folded it carefully and set it aside. There was a time orders gave his life meaning, but that time had passed. He had already found his true purpose. That very week he filed for long-term leave, turning in his uniform, and signed the papers that marked the beginning of a new life. He would call it the Willow Creek Shield, a foundation for children who knew the fear that hides behind closed doors, and for parents trying to build safety from the ruins of their own mistakes. The name came easily to him. The purpose came from what he'd lived through. When the first local paper wrote about it, the headline declared a profound truth. A soldier's second mission begins at home. Their new sanctuary was a humble one, a renovated corner on Main Street where vast windows drank in the morning sun. Emily chose the color for the walls, a pale, calming blue, because she said it felt like taking a deep breath. At just 8 years old, she had appointed herself the foundation's youngest heart and soul. Each week she'd bring her paintings gentle scenes of sunlight, of whispering trees and families holding hands, hanging them in the lobby where visitors would often pause, captivated by their simple grace, unaware they were masterpieces from a little girl who had weathered her own brutal storms. Jack would watch from the doorway, listening as she quietly explained her art. "This one," she would whisper, "is called a safe place." And in that moment, those 4 simple words held more power than any speech he could ever deliver. Jonah, now a sturdy toddler with a wild mop of brown curls and a laugh that echoed with pure joy, spent his days charting a joyful course between the sanctuary of the office and the freedom of the park. He would wave at strangers with the unblemished trust of a child who knew no fear, and that alone was a miracle that reaffirmed Jack's faith in the world. And Rex, ever the faithful guardian, had become more than just a dog. He was a local legend. A photographer from the local paper captured a single breathtaking image Rex, a silent sentinel beside Jonah's crib, his massive head resting protectively near the baby's tiny arm. That one photograph spread like a wildfire of hope, first through Willow Creek, then igniting the hearts of neighboring towns, and finally across the digital world, where thousands of souls he'd never meet left messages calling Rex the hero he truly was. Just 1 month later, the county police department honored him as an honorary retired K-9, draping a shining medal over his strong neck. Jack watched it all with a quiet, knowing smile, his heart swelling as Emily clapped the loudest of anyone there. The foundation born from their pain began to flourish beyond his wildest dreams. First calls came from the next town over, then from all across the state. Volunteers flooded the once empty space teachers, counselors and fellow veterans, all offering a piece of their strength. But amid the growth, Jack held its core mission sacred. No matter how big it got, every child who crossed their threshold would find warmth, a sense of safety, and a living story of hope. On the wall hung a single cherished frame, not of awards or accolades, but of 3 profoundly simple things. Emily's first drawing of their new home, Rex's paw print immortalized in ink, and a quote Jack had inscribed beneath them. "You protect what you love by learning how to stay." One tranquil afternoon, as Jack worked by the sunlit office window, his assistant's voice came over the intercom announcing a visitor. The name she spoke made his world stand still. Marilyn Carter. For a long, heavy moment, he remained silent. The very air grew thick and motionless, as if the past itself was standing just outside his door. When he finally brought himself to see her, he discovered a woman worn down by time and regret, older and somehow smaller. Her once sharp edges were gone, replaced by the fragile humility of someone who finally understood all she had lost. She didn't take a seat, but stood with her hands twisted together, her gaze fixed on the floor. I just wanted to see Emily," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I know I don't deserve her forgiveness. I just need to know that she's okay." Jack watched her, the old fiery anger now just cold, heavy embers in his soul. A weight, but no longer a weapon. "She's more than all right," he said at last, his voice steady and calm. "She's painting again. She's laughing. She is safe." Marilyn simply nodded, a single tear finally breaking free, tracing a path of sorrow down her cheek. "And with that, I have my answer." As she turned her shoulders, heavy, Jack's voice followed, soft but firm. "She deserves peace, not the ghosts of what broke her." Marilyn froze at the threshold, hesitating before whispering back, "Thank you for giving her that." Silence was his only reply, and she never looked back. The door clicked shut. As dusk fell, Jack drove home under a sky of dying light. The town was still its lamps, flickering to life one by one. He cut the engine and just stood there, watching his home glow a warm beacon against the encroaching night. And inside, Emily worked on a new painting on the floor, Jonah content to scribble beside her. And Rex was there, stretched out beside them both, with eyes half shut but always alert, every inch of him the silent guardian he had always been. Jack leaned against the doorway, just letting the image settle deep within his soul. This wasn't perfection or some grand victory that wiped away the past, but there was a fragile, tangible peace forged in the small, quiet moments that had pushed out all the chaos. He joined them on the floor, feigning a critique of Emily's painting, until her laughter filled the room as she called him clueless. Jonah then crawled into his lap, tightly clutching a little toy soldier, and Rex gave a single thump of his tail before resting his head on Jack's knee. "You know," Jack said quietly, "this might just be the greatest mission I've ever been on." Emily glanced up, a soft smile on her face. "You mean us?" He just nodded. "Yeah, you." The simple truth of his words hung in the air. Emily just leaned into him, her silence a perfect answer. The night deepened, the quiet hum of their life unbroken within those walls. Outside, a gentle breeze rustled the trees, carrying the soft scent of lilac and the faint, distant music of wind chimes. Jack stepped onto the back porch for a moment, the old deck cool beneath his bare feet as the garden bathed in moonlight. Emily appeared beside him, Jonah in her arms, Rex at her heels. Together they stood in the evening's soft hush, the warm kitchen light spilling out to wrap around them like a tender embrace. Jack rested his hand on Emily's shoulder, the simple warmth from her small frame anchoring him firmly in this perfect moment. He said nothing. There were no words left to say. Rex settled down at their feet. Jonah reached a tiny hand for the stars as Emily tilted her face to the heavens. Jack watched them all. 3 souls once broken, now healed, and realized this was the true meaning of home. Not the walls, not the pictures, not even the promise of safety. It was choosing every single day to stay, and to love in the profound quiet that follows the storm. The wind whispered through the trees one last time, then fell still. Behind them, their house glowed a steady, soft light, a small but constant beacon there in the town of Willow Creek, where 4 souls had finally discovered what it truly meant to be whole. Sometimes it's the quietest souls who possess the greatest strength. Those who never seek the spotlight are often the very ones holding it all together when everyone else looks away. Real love doesn't always roar like a lion. More often it works in silence in the late hours, in small kindnesses that never receive applause. And maybe that is the very thing that keeps this world spinning. That unseen courage, the loyal hearts, both human and animal, who consistently give so much more than they ever take. If this story resonated with you, take a moment and share your thoughts in the comments section. Tell us what you felt, what memories it stirred, or the one soul you hold in your heart today. Subscribe to continue this journey through more powerful sagas of unbreakable bonds and quiet heroism. And may peace find you and all your loved ones wherever you are.